Picture the world as it once was. Not the world of cities and roads and the constant hum of progress, but a world breathing slow and deep. A world where the sun fell differently through the trees, casting longer shadows across valleys that had never heard human language. The air hung thick with moisture. Rivers ran wild, carving paths through stone that would take millennia to smooth. And in the mud along those riverbanks, something pressed down, something heavy, something immense. Footprints, not the prints of deer or bear, not even the great cats that prowled the forests. These were different, deeper, wider than any human foot should be. The kind of impression that makes you step back and recalculate what you thought you knew about the world. Long ago, when the night descended and the fires crackled in circles of stone, elders spoke in hushed tones. They spoke of the time before, the time when others walked these lands, tall ones, strong ones, beings who could uproot trees with their hands and whose voices echoed like thunder across the plains. Every culture has these stories, from the frozen north to the tropical islands, from the mountains of Asia to the deserts of the Americas. The names change: Titans, Nephilim, Jotner, Ka, but the essence remains the same: giants. The question that haunts us across thousands of years is simple, yet profound. Were these stories merely metaphors for natural forces, for mountains and storms, and the overwhelming power of nature itself? Or did they preserve something real, something that once breathed and walked and left its mark upon the earth before fading into the mists of prehistory? What if giants once walked among us? What if the bones we found, the structures we cannot explain, the myths that spanned continents, what if they all point toward a truth we've been too rational, too modern, too certain of our own understanding to accept? This is where our journey begins, not with certainty, but with wonder, not with answers, but with questions that refuse to stay buried. Before we venture into the realm of mystery, we must first acknowledge what science knows for certain. Because giants did once walk the earth. That much is undeniable. 50,000 years ago, during the Pleistocene epoch, the world was populated by creatures of almost mythological proportions. Mammoths stood 13 feet tall at the shoulder, their curved tusks reaching toward the sky like ancient weapons. Giant ground sloths, some weighing up to 4 tons, lumbered through forests that are now gone. In Australia, the Diprotona marsupial, the size of a rhinoceros, grazed on vegetation near waterholes that would eventually dry up and disappear. Across North America, dire wolves hunted in packs, and short-faced bears towered over their prey at heights exceeding 10 feet when standing upright. This was a world of megafauna, a world where size was survival, where bulk meant dominance. And humans, small, clever, vulnerable humans, witnessed them all, lived alongside them, hunted them, feared them. And when these great beasts finally vanished between 12 and 10,000 years ago, their bones remained. Massive skeletal structures that early peoples would have stumbled upon in caves, eroding from cliffs, exposed by floods. Imagine finding the skull of a mammoth or the femur of a giant sloth without the context of modern paleontology. How would you explain it? What story would you tell? Perhaps the legends of giants began here, in the very real encounters with the bones of extinct megafauna. Recent discoveries show that humans and these enormous creatures coexisted for millennia. In South America, evidence suggests that giant sloths and mastodons lived alongside human populations until as recently as 7,000 years ago. The memory of such beings would have been passed down through generations, growing taller in the telling, becoming more human-like with each retelling. Science offers us this explanation with confidence. The giants of myth, it says, were born from the misidentification of ancient animal remains. A reasonable hypothesis, a rational framework. But as we shall see, the story does not end here, because some myths cannot be explained by mammoth bones alone. Some structures defy the logic of human scale, and some mysteries persist precisely because they refuse to fit neatly into the categories we've created. In Greece, the Titans preceded the Olympian gods, enormous beings who held up the sky and were eventually cast down into the depths of Tartarus. The Norse spoke of the Jotnar, ice giants who lived in Jotunheim and clashed with the gods of Asgard in battles that would shake the world. Move across the globe to the Pacific Islands, and the story repeats. A truth about who walked the earth before us, and what became of them. Shift now from story to stone, from the ephemeral nature of myth to the undeniable weight of physical evidence. In Lebanon, nestled among the ruins of the Roman Temple of Jupiter, lie 3 stone blocks known as the Trilithon. Each weighs approximately 800 tons. Nearby, still resting in its ancient quarry, sits an even larger megalith, the stone of the pregnant woman, weighing an estimated 1,000 tons. How were these stones moved? Conventional archaeology suggests the Romans accomplished this feat using rollers, ropes, and thousands of workers. Yet no contemporary Roman text describes the process. No engineering manual explains the technique. We are left to speculate, to reverse engineer a method that should be impossible given the technology of the time. In the 1800s, as America expanded westward and towns sprouted across virgin territory, newspapers became filled with a peculiar type of story. Reports of giant skeletons unearthed by farmers, miners, and railroad workers appeared with surprising regularity. In 1869, workers digging a well in Cardiff, New York, claimed to have discovered a petrified giant over 10 feet tall. It caused a sensation. Thousands paid to view what became known as the Cardiff Giant. Showman P.T. Barnum even commissioned a replica, which competed with the original for audiences. Eventually, the creator, George Hull, confessed it was an elaborate hoax, a carved gypsum figure buried deliberately to dupe the gullible public. Yet not all accounts were so easily dismissed. In Wisconsin, the New York Times reported in 1912 that Smithsonian scientists had discovered skeletons of extraordinary size, some reaching 7 to 9 feet in length, buried in mounds constructed by an unknown culture. In Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, and across the Midwest, similar findings were recorded in local papers, bones far exceeding normal human proportions, often accompanied by copper tools and ornate burial goods. Most of these discoveries have no physical evidence remaining. The bones have vanished, lost to time, misplaced in private collections, or, as conspiracy theories suggest, deliberately suppressed by academic institutions uncomfortable with anomalies that don't fit established narratives. Some were undoubtedly hoaxes, fabricated for profit or attention. Others may have been misidentifications of extinct megafauna. The femur of a mastodon, to an untrained eye, might appear humanoid. Wishful thinking combined with poor record keeping created a feedback loop of sensationalism. But some cases resist easy explanation. Photographs exist, though of questionable authenticity. Official reports remain in archives, dusty and forgotten. And the sheer volume of claims, spread across decades and continents, creates a pattern that's difficult to dismiss entirely as coincidence or fabrication. What is clear is this: in the 19th century, people wanted to believe in giants. Whether that belief stemmed from biblical literalism, national mythology, or something witnessed and half remembered, the yearning persisted. And perhaps that yearning itself tells us something important, that giants occupy a space in human consciousness that refuses to be rationalized away. Return now to Scripture, to texts considered sacred by billions, and to passages that have troubled theologians for millennia. Genesis 6-4 states simply, "There were giants in the earth in those days." And also after that, "When the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown, the Nephilim." The word itself derives from the Hebrew root naphal, meaning to fall, the fallen ones. But who exactly were they? Mainstream biblical scholarship often interprets this passage metaphorically. The sons of God were perhaps the descendants of Seth, righteous men who intermarried with the daughters of Cain. The resulting offspring were not literally giant, but figuratively so great in wickedness and violence, necessitating divine intervention in the form of the flood. Yet the Book of Enoch, an apocryphal text that was once considered scripture by early Christians, offers a more literal and disturbing account. Here, the Watcher's angelic beings assigned to observe humanity violated their mandate. They descended to earth, took human women as wives, and taught forbidden knowledge, metallurgy, cosmetics, weaponry, sorcery. The children born of these unions were the Nephilim, giants who stood hundreds of cubits tall, consumed all the resources of the land, and eventually turned to cannibalism. God sent the flood specifically to cleanse the earth of this corruption. Yet Numbers 13-33 suggests that Nephilim survived even after the deluge. When Israelite spies returned from Canaan, they reported, "And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants. And we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight." The story of David and Goliath reinforces this thread. Goliath of Gath stood 6 cubits and a span, approximately 9 feet 9 inches. He was described as a warrior from childhood, wearing armor that weighed 125 pounds, wielding a spear whose iron point alone weighed 15 pounds. 1 Samuel also mentions Goliath's brothers and kinsmen, suggesting a familial line of exceptional stature. Alternative researchers propose that these texts preserve genetic memory of interbreeding between early Homo sapiens and other hominin species, perhaps Denisovans, or an unknown archaic population. The sons of God become not angels, but physically superior humans from an earlier, more robust lineage. The corruption was genetic, not spiritual. The flood, a cataclysmic event that nearly erased our species, became mythologized as divine punishment. Mainstream archaeology dismisses the literal interpretation. No skeletal evidence confirms the existence of giants of such proportions. The texts, they argue, are theological allegory designed to explain humanity's capacity for evil and God's judgment. Yet the persistence of these narratives, their presence across multiple texts and traditions, keeps the question alive. Were the Nephilim myth or memory? And if memory, what exactly were we remembering? Footprints are perhaps the most intimate evidence a creature can leave behind. A snapshot of a single moment weight distributed, toes pressed into earth, movement captured in sediment that hardens into stone. And across the world, in layers of rock that date back millions of years, footprints have been found that don't fit the established timeline of human evolution. In 1976, paleoanthropologist Mary Leakey discovered a trail of footprints in Latoli, Tanzania, preserved in volcanic ash. They dated to 3.6 million years ago and were attributed to Australopithecus afarensis, an early hominin ancestor. The prints showed bipedal locomotion, a crucial step in human evolution. Science accepted them without controversy. But other discoveries have proven more problematic. In the Paluxy River of Texas, footprints were found that appeared to show human tracks alongside those of dinosaurs in Cretaceous limestone rock dating back 100 million years. For years, creationists cited these as evidence that humans and dinosaurs coexisted, disproving evolutionary timelines. Subsequent analysis revealed that many of the human prints were either eroded dinosaur tracks or deliberate carvings. Mystery solved. Yet not all anomalous footprints have been explained away. In the 1800s, a print measuring 19 inches long was reported in limestone near Carson, Nevada. In South Africa, a single footprint, apparently human, was found in granite estimated to be between 200 million and 3 billion years old. In Sri Lanka, a massive footprint known as Sri Pada or Adam's Peak, measuring nearly 6 feet in length, has been venerated for centuries by multiple religions, each claiming it as the mark of their founder or deity. Geological processes can create print-like formations through erosion and mineral deposition. Pareidolia, our tendency to see patterns and randomness, explains many supposed anomalies. Most giant footprint claims fall apart under scrutiny, revealed as natural features misinterpreted or outright fabrications. But the phenomenon itself reveals something important. Humanity has been looking for giants in the ground, searching for proof that we were not alone, that before us walked beings of greater scale. Whether we find them or merely wish to find them, the search continues. Because footprints, unlike bones or stories, carry a specificity. They suggest presence, movement, intention. They whisper across the ages. Something was here. Biology imposes constraints. This is not theory but demonstrable fact, confirmed through mathematics and observable in nature. And when it comes to giants, true giants, beings twice or 3 times the size of modern humans, biology says no. The square-cube law, first articulated by Galileo Galilei in 1638, explains why. As an object increases in size, its volume grows as the cube of its dimensions, but its surface area only increases as the square. Applied to living organisms, This means that as a creature doubles in height, its weight increases eightfold, but the cross-sectional area of its bones only quadruples. The result? The skeleton becomes proportionately weaker as size increases. A human standing 8 feet tall experiences this firsthand. Robert Wadlow, the tallest verified person in history, stood 8 feet 11 inches at his death in 1940. Skeletal structure required leg braces to support his weight. He suffered from poor circulation, diminished sensation in his extremities, and eventually died from an infected blister that went unnoticed due to nerve damage. His body could not sustain itself. Scale him up further to 15 or 20 feet, and the problems compound exponentially. Bones would need to be disproportionately thick to bear the load, so thick that mobility would become impossible. The heart would struggle to pump blood to the brain against increased gravitational resistance. Heat dissipation would fail. Larger bodies generate heat faster than they can shed it. Respiratory systems would falter under the demand for oxygen to sustain such mass. This is why elephants have column-like legs instead of slender limbs. Why blue whales, the largest animals ever known to have existed, live in water where buoyancy negates weight. Why sauropod dinosaurs required complex air sac systems and hollow bones to reduce mass while maintaining size. A human-shaped giant of 15 feet, walking upright, with proportions similar to ours, would collapse under its own weight. The biology doesn't support it. The physics doesn't allow it. Giants, in the mythological sense, are impossible. Yet nature has a way of surprising us. Gigantism in humans, caused by pituitary gland dysfunction, proves that growth beyond normal limits is possible, even if ultimately fatal. And throughout history, human populations have varied significantly in average height. The Dinka people of South Sudan routinely exceed 6.5 feet. Skeletal remains from the Upper Paleolithic show populations averaging 6 feet, significantly taller than the malnourished medieval Europeans who succeeded them. Could there have been isolated populations, perhaps from a different hominin lineage, whose average height reached 7 or even 8 feet? Could environmental factors, diet, oxygen levels, atmospheric pressure, have once allowed for greater size? The answer from mainstream science is cautious, but not dismissive. Possibly. Within reason, within the limits set by biology. But 20-foot giants? Beings whose footprints span 6 feet? No, biology draws the line. Unless, of course, the rules were once different. Step now outside the boundaries of accepted science and into speculation. Not baseless fantasy, but hypothesis built on emerging research and anomalies that don't quite fit the standard model. What if Earth's gravity has not always been constant? What if, at some point in the distant past, conditions existed that allowed for larger life forms? Physicists generally regard gravity as a constant, unchanging force determined by mass and distance. Yet some alternative theorists propose that Earth's mass has increased over geological time through cosmic dust accumulation, or expansion of the Earth's core. If Earth were significantly less massive millions of years ago, gravitational force would have been weaker, and larger organisms could have evolved without the structural constraints imposed today. This would explain the existence of dinosaurs. Sauropods like Argentinosaurus weighed up to 100 tons, yet walked on legs that, according to square cube law, should have shattered under their weight. Some researchers suggest that atmospheric pressure was higher in the Mesozoic, or that oxygen levels were significantly elevated, or that gravity itself was different. Similarly, the massive insects of the Carboniferous period, dragonflies with 2-foot wingspans, thrived in atmospheric conditions that no longer exist. When those conditions changed, the megafauna declined. Could the same principle apply to large hominins? There's also the question of the magnetic field. Earth's geomagnetic field has fluctuated dramatically over time, even reversing polarity multiple times in our planet's history. Some scientists speculate that variations in the magnetic field might have affected biological growth patterns, cosmic radiation exposure, and atmospheric retention, all factors that could theoretically influence maximum organism size. Then there is the controversial hypothesis that oxygen saturation in Earth's atmosphere was once significantly higher. More oxygen would support greater metabolic demands, allowing larger bodies to function efficiently. Evidence from amber samples suggests Cretaceous atmosphere contained up to 35% oxygen compared to today's 21%. Could similar conditions have existed during the time humans first evolved? None of these ideas have widespread acceptance in mainstream science. They remain speculative, sitting at the fringes of academic discourse. Yet they offer a possible framework for understanding how giants, whether human or otherwise, might have once existed without violating the laws of physics as we currently understand them. The rules we think are fixed may, in fact, be variables. And if the playing field was different, the game would have produced different players. Folklore is a peculiar thing. It preserves details that should have been forgotten, embellishing some facts while preserving others with startling accuracy. And sometimes it offers us fragments so strange they resist categorization. In Irish tradition, particularly in the mining communities of County Antrim, stories circulated for generations about a monstrous skull discovered deep in a coal seam during the mid-1800s. Workers, digging by lantern light in the cold earth, struck something hard. Not coal, not rock, bone. The skull, according to their accounts, was enormous, far larger than any human head should be. Estimates varied, but some claimed it was nearly 3 feet in length, with a jaw capable of holding a man's fist. The teeth were described as proportionally massive, double-rowed in some tellings. The coal seam itself dated back tens of millions of years, long before humans walked the earth. Photographs were supposedly taken, but none survive. The skull itself disappeared, lost to time, or perhaps deliberately destroyed to avoid uncomfortable questions. The miners spoke of it in hushed tones, unsure whether they had unearthed the remains of a giant or something else entirely a creature, neither fully human nor entirely animal. Skeptics dismissed the story outright. Coal from that era would predate hominins by millions of years. Any skull found would belong to an extinct mammal, misidentified by uneducated laborers eager for sensational tales. Perhaps a cave bear, whose skulls can appear eerily human-like when fragmented. Perhaps nothing at all, a story, invented in a pub and repeated until it became local legend. Yet the tale persisted. Written accounts appear in regional histories. Elderly miners, decades later, would swear to its truth, describing the weight of the bone in their hands, the unnatural size, the way it made them feel small, watched as if they had disturbed something that should have remained buried. This is the rough edge of history. The place where documentation fails and memory alone carries the weight of evidence. We cannot prove the Irish giant existed, but neither can we entirely dismiss the possibility that something unusual was found, something that didn't fit neatly into Victorian understanding and was therefore lost, discarded, forgotten. Mysteries persist not because we lack answers, but because we lose the questions. A single phalanx, no larger than the last joint of your pinky finger. If you have ancestry from Melanesia, Southeast Asia, or Australia, you likely carry Denisovan DNA. Up to 5% of your genome came from them. But here's what captures the imagination: the physical descriptions. The jaw found on the Tibetan plateau was massive, with molars significantly larger than those of either Neanderthals or modern humans. How tall were they? We don't know. No complete skeleton exists, but the proportions suggest something formidable, and they may not have been the only ones. In Indonesia, fossils of Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbits, show that multiple human species coexisted as recently as 50,000 years ago. If evolution produced a 3-foot-tall human, why not an 8-foot-tall one? Theories abound about super-archaic hominins ghost populations that show up in genetic data but have left no fossil record. The human family tree is not a straight line but a tangled web of branches, most of which we've yet to trace. Could one of these ghost populations have been the giants of legend? A hominin lineage that evolved toward greater size, adapted to cold climates or resource-rich environments where bulk was advantageous? A species that hunted megafauna, perhaps grew proportionally large in response to prey size, then vanished when the climate shifted and their food sources disappeared. These bones, according to the theory, were then systematically hidden or destroyed to protect the prevailing narrative of human evolution and suppress evidence that would challenge established academic dogma. So why does the theory persist? If records were lost, there would be no documentation. The unfalsifiable nature of the claim makes it resilient. Academic paradigms shift slowly, and anomalous data is often dismissed rather than investigated. The skepticism toward the Smithsonian may be misplaced, but the underlying mistrust of authority, of official narratives, of gatekeepers who decide what counts as legitimate knowledge, is not entirely unwarranted. The truth, as best as can be determined, is less dramatic. Some genuine oversized bones were found most likely from individuals with gigantism, a medical condition, not a separate species. These were cataloged, studied, and stored alongside millions of other specimens. Others were hoaxes, fabricated for profit or attention. And still others were misidentifications, megafauna bones, mistaken for human remains by untrained observers. No grand conspiracy, just the messy, imperfect process of science trying to make sense of incomplete data. Yet in the absence of transparency, in the gaps where records should exist but don't, speculation flourishes. And perhaps that's the real lesson. Mysteries thrive in darkness, and the best disinfectant is light. When you stand at the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza, something within you recalibrates. The blocks tower above, each weighing multiple tons, fitted together with such precision that a sheet of paper cannot slide between them. And this structure was built, we are told, by a Bronze Age civilization using copper tools, wooden sledges, and rope. The engineering is not impossible. Archaeologists have demonstrated methods that could work ramps, counterweights, massive labor forces organized with precision. Yet the sheer scale staggers the imagination. Over 2 million stone blocks quarried, transported, and positioned with astronomical alignment, all within a 20-year construction window, according to Herodotus. Now travel to Kumapunku in Bolivia, where andesite blocks weighing over 100 tons each are carved with such precision that they appear machine-tooled, interlocking joints, perfectly flat surfaces, drill holes with uniform depth. The Tiwanaku civilization, who built this site around 1,500 years ago, supposedly had no written language, no wheeled vehicles, no draft animals. Yet they created masonry that modern engineers struggle to replicate. Or consider the Moai of Easter Island, over 900 massive stone statues, some weighing 80 tons, transported miles from the quarry to platforms around the island's perimeter. The islanders tell a story. The statues walked. Modern archaeology explains it through wooden rollers and rope, but the explanation feels incomplete when you stand before a 30-foot statue, positioned with mathematical precision. Alternative theorists ask, were these structures built not by ordinary humans, but by giants, or with the help of giants? The scale makes sense if you imagine builders for whom a 2-ton block is not overwhelming but manageable. If your arms span twice the width of a normal human, if your legs generate 3 times the force, suddenly the mechanics shift. The impossible becomes merely difficult. Mainstream archaeology rejects this out of hand. There is no skeletal evidence of giant builders. The methods, while challenging, fall within the realm of human capability, given sufficient time, labor, and cultural motivation. Many megalithic sites have been successfully dated to specific cultures with known histories. Yet the psychological weight of these structures remains. They were designed to impress, to overwhelm, to demonstrate power beyond the everyday. Whether built by giants or for giants, or simply by humans reaching toward the scale of gods, they serve the same function, to make us feel small, to remind us that once, whether in reality or in aspiration, greatness walked the earth. And in their silence, these stones hold older stories than history can retrieve. Stories not written in text, but encoded in dimension, in weight, in the audacity of their construction. They whisper a question across millennia. Who were we capable of becoming? Every major culture on Earth has a flood myth. The names and details vary, but the core remains consistent. The world was once wicked, the waters rose, and nearly all life was destroyed. Only a few survived, sometimes through a boat, sometimes by climbing mountains, sometimes by divine intervention. The Epic of Gilgamesh from ancient Mesopotamia tells of Utnapishtim, who built a great ship to survive the deluge. In Hindu tradition, Manu is warned by a fish avatar of Vishnu and builds an ark. The Greeks spoke of Deucalion, who survived Zeus's flood. Chinese mythology describes Gun Yu controlling the Great Flood. Native American tribes across the continent have independent flood traditions, as do Aboriginal Australians, Polynesian islanders, and civilizations across Africa. And in many of these stories, giants appear, not as survivors, but as the reason for the flood. They are the corruption that required cleansing, the beings whose existence had so disrupted the natural order that the gods or God chose to reset creation entirely. In the Bible, it is the Nephilim whose presence immediately precedes the flood narrative. Genesis 6 describes their arrival, their interbreeding with humans, and then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. 40 days and nights of rain follow. An entire world drowned. The book of Enoch is more explicit. The Nephilim consumed all the resources, grew violent, and turned against humanity itself. Their destruction was necessary for the survival of the species. The flood was not punishment, but mercy, the removal of a genetic and spiritual threat. Could these myths preserve a real event? Geological evidence confirms that approximately 12,900 years ago, at the end of the Younger Dryas period, Earth experienced catastrophic climate shifts. The ice sheets melted rapidly, raising sea levels by hundreds of feet. Coastal populations, where most humans lived, would have been inundated. Entire landscapes disappeared beneath the waves. The Black Sea, once a freshwater lake, was suddenly flooded by the Mediterranean in what must have seemed like an apocalypse to those living along its shores. If giants, whether literal large humans or a metaphor for dominant populations, lived primarily in low-lying, resource-rich areas, they would have been disproportionately affected. The flood, in this interpretation, was not divine punishment, but natural catastrophe. Yet to survivors, clinging to mountaintops or fleeing inland, it would have seemed intentional. The destruction of the old order, the washing away of the giants. And so the story was told, passed down through generations, mythologized, theologized, but at its heart, perhaps, a memory that once the world was different, that once others walked among us, and that a great water came and made it end. In 1520, Ferdinand Magellan became the first European to successfully navigate the strait that now bears his name, connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. During his expedition, Magellan's crew made landfall in a barren, windswept region of South America. And there, according to the expedition's chronicler Antonio Pigafetta, they encountered giants. Pigafetta described natives whose height exceeded 9 feet. He wrote that the Europeans reached only to their waists, and that one giant had a voice like a muye bull. Magellan named the region Patagonia, the land of the big feet, after observing the enormous footprints left by these beings in the sand. Was Pigafetta exaggerating? Almost certainly. When subsequent expeditions visited Patagonia, they found the indigenous Tehuelche people, who were tall by European standards, averaging around 6 feet, but hardly giants. Given that European sailors of the 16th century averaged 5 feet 4 inches, a 6-foot-tall native might indeed have seemed enormous. Yet the reports persisted. In 1764, British explorer Commodore John Byron, grandfather of the poet Lord Byron, documented encounters with Patagonians he estimated at 9 feet tall. His accounts fueled European imagination, spawning illustrations of towering natives dwarfing European sailors. The image of the Patagonian giant became embedded in Western consciousness. By the late 18th century, Spanish expeditions provided more measured assessments. They confirmed that the Tehuelche were indeed tall, but within normal human range. The giants were a case of exaggeration mixed with cultural shock and perhaps a bit of storytelling embellishment designed to make explorers' tales more thrilling. But here is what archaeology adds to the story. Skeletal remains found in Patagonia do show populations of unusual height. Some individuals exceeded 7 feet, well above the global average even for that era. And older remains from Pleistocene layers include bones of megafauna that the Tehuelches ancestors would have encountered giant ground sloths, massive short-faced bears. Perhaps the oral traditions of the region preserved these encounters, and Magellan's crew stumbled into a culture still telling stories of when true giants walked the land. The Patagonian giants, in the end, were less fiction than misperception, less deception than distortion, through the lens of cultural difference and time. Yet the legends they spawned continue to captivate, a reminder that in the meeting of worlds, reality often becomes myth, and sometimes myths contain the shadows of forgotten realities. Look up. Long before telescopes, long before we understood that stars were distant suns, ancient peoples watched the heavens and wove stories. And curiously, across cultures separated by oceans and centuries, giants were often linked not to the earth, but to the sky. They would seem to come from beyond the horizon, from the realm of gods. Their knowledge would seem miraculous. Their stature, whether literal or metaphorical, would dominate. Astronomical sites support this connection. Göbekli Tepe's pillars align with celestial events. Stonehenge marks solstices with precision. Cultures around the world built monuments not just to impress those on Earth, but to communicate with the heavens, as if the builders knew they were not alone, not the only intelligence watching the stars. Whether giants were spiritual beings, advanced ancestors, or simply the personification of cosmic forces, they occupy a liminal space between Earth and sky. Consider the vastness of geological time. Earth is approximately 4.5 billion years old. Complex life has existed for over 500 million years. Anatomically modern humans emerged roughly 300,000 years ago, a blink, a whisper in the immense span of deep time. And what survives? What becomes a fossil? Less than 1% of all organisms that have ever lived leave any trace in the fossil record. Fossilization requires specific conditions: rapid burial, low oxygen, mineralization of tissues before decay. Soft-bodied creatures rarely fossilize. Populations that lived in environments subject to erosion, mountains, coastlines, floodplains, leave virtually nothing behind. Imagine a species of large hominins that existed for 50,000 years in small, scattered populations. They lived nomadically, buried their dead in shallow graves that were later disturbed by scavengers or geological processes. They avoided caves, which are the primary sites of fossil preservation. After they disappeared, erosion washed their bones away. Rivers carved through their burial sites. Glaciers ground their remains to dust. How much evidence would remain? Perhaps none. Perhaps a single jaw fragment, lying undiscovered in a remote canyon. Perhaps DNA traces in the genomes of modern humans' ghost populations visible only through genetic analysis, with no corresponding skeletal record. This is not speculation, it is reality. Denisovans were an entire species identified from a finger bone and a few teeth. Homo naledi, discovered in South Africa, was unknown to science until 2013, despite living as recently as 236,000 years ago. The fossil record is not a complete archive, but a series of lottery wins lucky accidents of preservation and discovery. Silent stones, valleys scoured by ice, coastlines submerged beneath rising seas. These are the graveyards of prehistory. And they hold secrets we will never retrieve. How many species walked the earth and vanished without a trace? How many variations of humanity rose and fell before we became the last standing? If giants existed, whether as a separate species or as populations that exceptionally large, Homo sapiens, their evidence may be gone. Not suppressed, not hidden, simply lost to the relentless, indifferent processes that erase almost everything. The absence of evidence frustrates us. We want certainty. But the earth offers only fragments, hints, the faintest echoes of what once was. And in that silence, mystery finds its home. This theory walks the knife's edge between science and speculation, drawing from emerging fields like epigenetics and ancient DNA studies, while venturing into territory most academics would find uncomfortable. Human genetics, we now know, are far more complex than simple Mendelian inheritance. Genes can be switched on or off by environmental factors. Growth patterns can be influenced by diet, altitude, disease, and even social stress. The same genome, under different conditions, produces dramatically different phenotypes. Gigantism in humans results from pituitary gland disorders, typically caused by tumors that overproduce growth hormone. But what if, in certain populations under specific environmental pressures, genes associated with height and bone density became preferentially expressed? What if selection favored size, whether for cold adaptation, Bergmann's rule, for competition with megafauna, or for social dominance? The genetics exist. Rare mutations in the FGFR3 gene cause achondroplasia, resulting in shortened limbs. Mutations in the GH1 gene affect growth hormone production. What if ancient populations developed mutations that enhanced size rather than limiting it? And what if those populations interbred with Homo sapiens, leaving genetic signatures we've yet to fully decode? Denisovan DNA, for example, includes variants associated with larger jaw size and dental structures. Some researchers propose that Denisovan admixture contributed to high-altitude adaptation in Tibetan populations. But what if it also contributed to stature variations? Then there's the controversial fringe. Could giants have been intentional genetic creations? Ancient astronaut theorists suggest that the Nephilim were hybrids, the result of genetic manipulation by extraterrestrial visitors. Biblical literalists interpret sons of God as fallen angels engaging in forbidden unions, creating chimeric offspring. Mainstream genetics dismisses these as fantasy. There is no evidence of genetic engineering in the ancient past, no mechanism by which such manipulation could have occurred without advanced biotechnology. The idea of alien intervention requires extraordinary proof, none of which exists. Yet the human genome contains anomalies. Endogenous retroviruses' viral DNA integrated into our chromosomes. millions of years ago show that horizontal gene transfer is not merely theoretical, but part of our history. The same genome that codes for modern humans once built Neanderthals, Denisovans, and species we've yet to name. It is a flexible blueprint, capable of producing wildly different outcomes. Giants as genetic experiments? Almost certainly not. But giants as genetic variations, as populations push toward extremes by selection pressures we don't fully understand? That remains within the realm of possibility. And in the gaps of our knowledge, speculation, both reasonable and wild, will always find a foothold. Move eastward to the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys, where thousands of earthen mounds dot the landscape. The mound builder culture's Adena, Hopewell, Mississippian constructed elaborate ceremonial and burial sites from around 3,400 years ago until European contact. Early European settlers, encountering these structures, refused to believe that Native Americans could have built them. They theorized a lost race of mound builders, often described as larger and more advanced than the indigenous peoples they found. Excavations of mounds in the 19th century sometimes reported oversized skeletons 7, 8, even 10 feet long, according to newspaper accounts. Most of these claims have been debunked as hoaxes or misidentified bones. Burial practices that included flexed positions or bones disturbed by subsequent burials led to misinterpretations of size. But not all reports are easily dismissed. In 1883, the Smithsonian SIS, Bureau of Ethnology, published accounts of skeletal remains measuring 7 feet from burial mounds in West Virginia. Dr. Joseph Jones documented similar findings in Tennessee. Photographs exist, though often disputed, showing archaeologists beside unusually large femurs and skulls. The truth likely lies between extremes. Some indigenous populations may have had individuals of exceptional height due to genetic variation or diet. The Osage and Karankawa tribes, for instance, were noted by European explorers as unusually tall. Legends of giants may have been based on encounters with these populations, exaggerated through oral tradition. What remains undeniable is that Native American cultures across the continent preserve stories of ancient peoples who came before, who were different, who eventually disappeared. Whether these were true giants or simply earlier inhabitants reimagined through myth, the stories persist, woven into the land, carried in the names of rivers and mountains, echoing in the spaces where history and memory blur. Imagine a world 40,000 years ago. The ice sheets still grip much of the northern hemisphere, but habitable zones exist, steppes stretching across Siberia, fertile valleys in the Middle East, islands connected by land bridges since drowned. And in this world, multiple human species coexist. Homo sapiens, anatomically modern but still small in number, are spreading out of Africa. In Europe, Neanderthals have established cultures lasting hundreds of thousands of years, burying their dead, creating art, surviving in environments that would kill most modern humans. In Asia, Denisovans occupy highlands and forests, robust and powerful, adapted to extremes. In Indonesia, Homo floresiensis the hobbits hunt pygmy elephants on tropical islands. And perhaps others, unnamed and unidentified, live in pockets we've yet to discover. They interact, they trade, they compete for resources, and they interbreed. Modern human genomes carry the marks of these encounters. 2 to 4% Neanderthal DNA in non-African populations, up to 5% Denisovan DNA in Melanesians. Genetic studies reveal other contributions ghost populations that left their signature in our chromosomes, but no bones in the ground. What if among these ghost populations were giants? Not 15-foot mythological beings, but large humans 7, 8, 9 feet tall, built on frames meant to hunt megafauna, to survive in cold climates where mass mattered, to dominate landscapes where strength determined survival. Their populations were small, their territories vast. They interbred with smaller groups, their genetic contribution diluted over generations, but never entirely erased. Then the climate shifted. The Younger Dryas struck 12,900 years ago, bringing sudden cooling followed by rapid warming. Ice sheets melted catastrophically. Sea levels rose. Megafauna collapsed. The mammoths, the giant sloths, the cave bears all disappeared within a few thousand years. And with them, perhaps, went the giants. Populations already small and specialized, dependent on resources that no longer existed, would have dwindled. The giants, if they had ever existed as distinct populations, were memory. Megafauna, the primary prey for large predators and perhaps for large humans, vanished. If giants were at the upper limit of what human biology could sustain, they would have been vulnerable to injuries, circulatory problems, and skeletal stress. High infant mortality, shortened lifespans, and difficulty reproducing would keep populations small. Any environmental pressure drought, famine, climate shift would push them over the edge. He uses crutches to walk and has described his height as both a blessing and a burden. Fame and attention come with chronic pain and limited mobility. Not a species, not an invasion, just humans, rare and extraordinary, whose existence pushed the boundaries of what biology allowed. They walk among us still, these modern giants, and they remind us that the genome holds possibilities we rarely see, variations that, under different circumstances, might have defined entire populations. And what is rare today might once have been, if not common, then at least remembered. Close your eyes and imagine dawn breaking over a city, glass towers reflecting the first light, streets beginning to fill with the sounds of traffic and footsteps. And then, movement at the horizon. A figure, impossibly tall, striding across the landscape. Each step covers what would take a human 10 strides. The ground trembles faintly with each footfall. People stop, they stare. Phones are raised, cameras snapping images that will flood social media within seconds. Is it real? A hoax? CGI? The giant reaches the city's edge, and now there is no doubt. It is corporeal, solid, breathing. Its features are human, but proportions: stretched legs like columns, arms thick as tree trunks, a face that looks down from a height that defies comfort. What happens next? Governments scramble. Military units mobilize not with weapons drawn, but with scientific instruments. Biologists, anthropologists, geneticists converge. Where did it come from? How is it possible? Is it alone? The giant makes no aggressive moves. It simply observes, as if seeing the modern world for the first time, or perhaps seeing it again after an absence of millennia. Religious leaders would be divided. Some would proclaim it a sign, the fulfillment of prophecy, the return of the Nephilim, evidence that Scripture was literal truth. Others would urge caution, interpreting the giant as a test of faith or a deception. Churches would fill with those seeking answers or reassurance. Scientists would be euphoric and terrified in equal measure. DNA samples would be priority one. How does its biology work? How does it support such mass? What does its genome reveal? If it shares ancestry with Homo sapiens, the implications for human evolution would be profound. If it does not, the questions multiply exponentially. Archaeologists would re-examine every megalithic site with new eyes. Were these built by beings like this? Suddenly, Baalbek, Stonehenge, the pyramids all would be recontextualized. Not monuments to human ingenuity, but practical constructions scaled to a different size of builder. And the giant itself? What would it feel, standing in a world transformed beyond recognition? The forests it once knew replaced by concrete. The megafauna gone. The small, clever humans now dominant, their numbers beyond counting, their technologies incomprehensible. Would it feel like Enkidu from the Epic of Gilgamesh, lording a wild world lost? Or like Gulliver among the Lilliputians, powerful yet alien? The return of giants would shatter paradigms, not with violence, but with presence. With proof that our understanding of history is incomplete, that our place at the top of the biological hierarchy was not inevitable but contingent. We are not the only form humanity could take. We are merely the last, but they have not returned. And perhaps they never will. We are left with stories, with footprints in stone, with structures that seem to mock our sense of scale. And we are left to wonder, if they came back, would we recognize them? Or have we become so certain of our singularity that we could no longer see what stands right before us? Stories are not frivolous. They are how we encode meaning, how we transmit knowledge across generations, how we navigate the world. And the stories we tell about giants across cultures, across time, reveal something essential about the human psyche. Giants represent power, uncontrollable, overwhelming force. They are earthquakes given form, storms with intention. In a world where nature could destroy everything you built in an instant, where famine or flood or fire could wipe out your community, the giant becomes the embodiment of that fear. To tell a story about a giant is to name the terror, to give it shape, to imagine it defeated. David slays Goliath not because he is stronger, but because he is smarter, braver, touched by divine favor. The story reassures us, the powerful can be overcome. Giants also represent the other, that which is not us. In early human history, when multiple hominin species coexisted, encounters with beings who looked similar but were larger, stronger, or simply different would have been unsettling. The other tribe, the other species. The giant is the ultimate outsider, too large to integrate, too powerful to ignore. Stories of giants reflect anxieties about invasion, about competition, about the loss of territory and identity. But giants are also ancestors, the heroes of old, the forefathers who cleared the land, who defeated monsters, who built the foundations upon which civilization stands. To claim descent from giants is to claim greatness, to inherit a legacy of power. The Norse gods had giant blood in their veins. Greek heroes were often demigods, their stature reflecting their divine parentage. We make our ancestors larger than life because we wish to be larger ourselves. Psychologically, giants fulfill a developmental role. Children see adults as giants, beings of immense size and incomprehensible power. The adult world is built on a scale that dwarfs the child. Stories of giants allow children to process this disparity, to imagine themselves eventually growing to that size, to understand that power dynamics are not fixed but can be overturned. And perhaps most importantly, giants remind us of what we have lost. The world was once bigger, stranger, more diverse. There were more kinds of humans, more kinds of megafauna, more mysteries. Now we have cataloged and classified and explained. We stand alone as the only surviving human species. The giants are gone, and with them, a kind of magic. To tell stories about giants is to mourn that loss. Night falls again, as it has for millions of years. The sky darkens, stars emerge, and somewhere in a desert, on a mountain, beside a river, someone looks up and wonders, were giants real? Did they once walk the earth, leaving footprints in the mud, raising stones that defied human scale, interbreeding with our ancestors, and leaving faint traces in our DNA? Or were they always myth, a psychological construct, the personification of natural forces and existential fears? Perhaps the answer is both. Perhaps the truth lives in the space between fact and story, between own and legend. Perhaps giants were not a single thing, but many things. Megafauna misidentified, large hominins like Denisovans, individuals with gigantism, ancestral heroes mythologized beyond recognition, and the collective shadow of humanity's own potential. We are meaning-making creatures. We take fragments, bones, stones, stories, and weave them into narratives that help us understand our place in the cosmos. The giants are part of that narrative. They stand at the boundary between the known and the unknown, between history and prehistory, between the world as we understand it and the world as it might have been. If they existed, they are gone now. The earth has reclaimed their bones. The oceans have swallowed their cities. The glaciers have ground their monuments to dust. What remains are echoes, myths, megaliths, and the occasional anomaly that makes us pause and reconsider. But perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the function of giants is not to be proven or disproven, but to remain in that liminal space, inviting us to question, to imagine, to remain humble about the limits of our knowledge. Every decade brings new discoveries that rewrite what we thought we knew. Denisovans were myth until they weren't. Göbekli Tepe was impossible until it was found. The fossil record is incomplete, the genome still being decoded, the deep past still revealing its secrets. So we stand on the shoulders of those who came before metaphorically, if not literally. We carry their DNA, whether from Neanderthals or Denisovans, or ghost populations unnamed. We inherit their stories, even when we no longer remember their faces. And we walk forward into a future where new technologies, ancient DNA analysis, deep sea, archaeology satellite surveys might one day answer questions we've been asking since the first humans gathered around fires and told stories about the tall shadows that walked the earth when the world was young. What if giants once walked among us? The question remains open, and in its openness, it holds space for wonder, for mystery, for the possibility that the universe is larger, stranger, and more beautiful than we have yet allowed ourselves to imagine. The shadows stretch long, night deepens, and somewhere, in stone or story, or the silent sequences of the genome, the giants wait. Not for validation, not for proof, but for someone willing to look, to listen, to remember, and perhaps, just perhaps, to believe